In terms of the race itself, you would want to make sure you have appropriate plans for nutrition, but also hydration. As we know, dehydration is quite common in triathletes and competitors in the Ironman. It's important that you are adequately hydrated to maintain the integrity of the cardiovascular system so that you can deliver oxygen-rich and nutrient-rich blood to the exercising muscles. We've spoken about the nutritional demands of the energy cost of a triathlon, of the Ironman distance. Some competitors will burn in excess of 10,000 calories per race, and this is something that you will not be able to do without taking on additional food and fluids. If you consider that after 2.5 hours, your carbohydrate stores are basically used up, so you're going to need a constant supply of carbohydrate in a palatable but also transferable source, whether it be drinks or gels or perhaps solid foods. But this is something that the athlete themselves will have to experiment with, and that's also the importance of training. Not only will training help you with the adjustments to prepare for the race, but training gives you an opportunity to prepare for your nutritional needs. How much you can drink, how much you can take on, when you can eat, when not to eat. A lot of triathletes are concerned about taking on the right food and fluids, but also not about taking on too much so that they feel that they're a bit weighed down. And it's important that they have a balance in both food and fluid. In terms of the day itself, depending on the start time, you'll need to get up reasonably early so that you'll have at least 3 hours so that you can have your high carbohydrate meals. Even the night before, a lot of triathletes will carbo load. They'll have pasta dishes, rice dishes. On the morning, they'll maybe have something like a bagel, some yogurts, bananas, all those different types of things. But again, that's where individual preference comes in, and a lot of Ironman competitors have their own sort of tics and superstitions that aren't necessarily based on science, but sometimes it's important for what the athlete prefers that can allow for ultimate performance or maximizing performance. What you will want to avoid is probably eating things that are high in fiber, possibly high in fat, high in protein, because these things take slower to digest and therefore will cause some gastrointestinal discomfort or distress, and that can limit performance. So you want to have highly available and accessible carbohydrates, and combinations of glucose and fructose are perhaps the most desirable. In terms of what we can oxidize during a race, probably no more than 400 calories per hour. And we can correspond that or correlate that to around 90 grams of a carbohydrate mixture of the easily transportable glucose and fructose. If you're just using glucose alone, probably around 60 grams per hour, because that's basically when glucose reaches saturation and you can't add any more. But with the additional 30 grams of fructose, that enters the intestines into the bloodstream through a different mechanism, and therefore the body can tolerate a bit more. But we cannot stress that you will need to constantly eat, whether it be the gels or the drinks or the solids throughout the race, or else you won't finish, because once your carbohydrate stores start to deplete, then exercise performance is limited. And I'm sure we've all noticed or seen the videos such as the crawl, you know, and that's due to a complete degradation of the muscle glycogen stores. And without muscle glycogen and without to a lesser extent liver glycogen, then you can't really compete. So you need to sustain this throughout the event. Hydration also becomes important when we factor in climatic conditions. A lot of Ironman events take place in conditions that are probably warmer than what we're used to, and when it's warmer, then that may affect thermal perceptions, and sweat rates may also increase, and we don't want to see a situation where we're dehydrated, because that can limit exercise performance. Even around 2% body weight will affect exercise performance. So for athletes, it's important to get into the habit of monitoring their sweat loss, and an easy way to do this is weighing themselves, probably nude mass, before and after exercise, and then replacing the fluids accordingly. A useful guideline is around 500 mils per hour in the triathlon, but that will depend on the individual. whether they're a heavy sweater or not a heavy sweater as well. But I suppose a caveat to that is sometimes athletes can take on too much fluid, and that can lead to a condition known as hyponatremia, and where sodium levels within the plasma become low, and that can also be dangerous, but for another range of factors. So you got to be careful on that way, that you're not taking on too much water. One of the things that may affect that is the exercise intensity. Those people who run the slower times are more prone to that because they're taking on more fluid than what is being used to cool the body. I think it's important to recognise though that when you're talking about food and fluid ingestion during the race or the competition or even training, that there are certain times when it's perhaps more appropriate to take on what you need. And what I mean by that is the intensity. Not all elements of the race will be at the same exercise intensity, and that has important effects for blood flow. What we find is that when we're exercising at the more intense levels, we have less blood flow to the stomach, to the intestines, and that will have effects on how we can absorb food. So what I would recommend practically is perhaps to take on food and fluid when you're at the lower intensities of the race. Now, we are thinking 10, 12, 14 hours perhaps. So there will be opportunities, for example, if you're running downhill or cycling downhill, this may be a better opportunity for you to take on food when there's more blood flow to your gut, and therefore the food can be more accessibly transferred. If you're exercising intensely, perhaps running up a steep hill, then you may experience more difficulties in trying to process the food because of the blood flow redistribution.